You are the first one I'm telling this to. I didn't talk about it for years, but it has affected my life since then. I want to remain anonymous, but you can call me Mark. I'm from the Netherlands, I'm 32, and I was born in 1984. I rented a cabin with my girlfriend and our dog, near a forest called Eiffel. It's in the Ardennes, which stretches from Belgium to Germany. It was almost a 4-hour drive from where we lived. It was in the middle of the woods, but we had to drive through sand roads to get there. We planned on staying there for 14 days. The cabin was pretty nice. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath. Water and gas were hooked up from 2 tanks outside of the cabin. It had a closed porch and a small basement that was for storing wood. The basement could only be accessed from the outside of the cabin. The first couple of days were good, and we had a great time relaxing, going on long walks with our dog, and enjoying time away from so many people. The only strange thing was the dog would stay very close to us. Normally he'd run off and investigate his surroundings. He was a small dog, no more than 5 kilograms. Even when we were in the cabin, he would follow us closely, and every night he would sleep at the foot of the bed. I normally don't want him on the bed, but I didn't think it would help calm him down to get him off. When we would go outside on the closed porch to smoke a cigarette, he would completely flip out, just like he was in total terror to get out of the cabin so he could get close to us. After a few nights, I started waking up at night. I noticed that my dog was awake also, and he'd have his ears pointed so he could hear what was going on outside. It gave me the feeling he was tracking something outside. I didn't think much of it, so I just laid down and went back to dreamland. This repeated over and over, and a night later, my dog woke me up. He was growling and staring at the window. I told him to stop it, but he just kept going on. I tried to pay no attention to him, but he kept me up all night. My girlfriend woke up and asked what was going on with the dog. I told her he probably heard a cat or some other critter outside. But I did have a strange feeling about what was going on. I went outside to smoke a cigarette and check out what was going on. My dog followed me and was acting very strange. He didn't want me to go out, or go out himself. I went onto the porch anyways and was looking outside. I saw something big, but it was too dark to see what it was. It was as if my mind was in doubt and was playing a trick on me. It did scare me though. And I never get scared fast or act scared in the dark. But this time, something out there just rattled my nerves. I used to walk around in the dark and the woods with my dog, or alone, with no problems. I live on the outskirts of a small town, and if I walk 2 minutes, I'm in a nice big forest where I used to walk with my dog, often after midnight. But this time it scared me, and I thought it would probably be better not to go on an investigation. I put out my cigarette and went back inside. I sat down on the couch where I could look out the big window and watched the forest again. I thought I saw something again. I had to make sure it was nothing and ended up sitting there for a few hours until my girlfriend woke up and asked me to come back to bed. She asked me what was going on. I told her I couldn't sleep. I went back to bed with her and our dog followed, lying on the foot of our bed. I still felt nervous though, and the dog kept growling from time to time. Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep again that night. The next day, a good friend of mine, that I'll call Jonathan, and his girlfriend, who I'll call Megan, my sister, who I'll call Tara, and her husband, who I'll call Aiden, came up to visit and party with us. They planned to stay for 2 days, leaving my girlfriend and I 4 days of alone time after they left. We all had a great time, barbecued, drank some liquor, but then it got dark and we all ended up going into the house. There, we talked and drank some more. Then Aiden and Jonathan wanted to go outside and watch the stars, which we used to do back home. Where we were in the woods, it was pitch black, so you could really see the stars. I didn't really want to go back out there at night, but I also didn't want to spoil the night either, and I definitely didn't want to tell them about what I thought I saw last night, since I wasn't even sure what I saw myself. I ended up sticking a knife in my jeans and carrying my big mag light with me, all the while telling myself I didn't see anything and I needed to get a grip on myself. So we went outside and the dog was already going crazy. I put him back inside with the girls. That made me want to stay out in the woods even less. I really wanted to stay in the cabin with them, but I didn't let my fear win over. As we walked, Jonathan and Aiden were ahead of me. All 3 of us had flashlights on, and we were doing our best not to trip over the rocks and pebbles. We went down a small game trail because the forest was so thick, you can't really move around in it, especially when it's that dark. Jonathan noticed a foul smell and started making jokes about it. He thought we'd end up seeing a wild boar or stumble across a dead one. We all started to smell it, and I've never quite smelled anything like that before. It's hard for me to even give a comparison on the smell, but it did smell like decaying animal, and a little bit like wet, sour fur. It also had the distinct smell of a ferret, if you know what that smells like. It's a very distinct smell. Either way, it was really nasty. Aiden was very quiet and looking around all the time, at least as well as you could in the type of darkness that we were in. A few minutes later, he said he wanted to turn around and go back to the cabin. I agreed, but Jonathan didn't want to turn back. That's when we noticed something in front of us. We all went quiet and started listening to the noises of the forest. Aiden started shining his light around again and admitted he thought he'd saw something a while ago, but wasn't sure what it was, so he didn't want to say anything. We started hearing the sound of something big walking towards us, and we started shining our flashlights around. I saw two big eyes reflect in the light. They were behind a bush. The eyes were yellow, and this thing was huge. I've never seen an animal that big before. It looked like it was standing on two legs. And honestly, I was so stunned by what I was looking at, and because of the thickness of the trees, I can't describe what I saw that well. We only have deer and wild pigs here. We don't have anything big like wolves or bears, so I know it couldn't have been one of them. I froze. The first thing that came to my mind was a werewolf. Aiden ran off in panic, and Jonathan soon followed, with me close behind him. I'm not sure if it was chasing us, because I was running for my life. We made it back to the cabin and stood outside for a few seconds, wanting to know if it had followed us. We didn't say a word. We just kept looking around. The whole time I was thinking that it was going to burst out of the trees at any second, but nothing happened. I lit a cigarette to calm my nerves, and we passed it around, the three of us. I told them we better not say anything and scare the girls, because we didn't know what it was that we saw. We argued about whether or not to just grab all of our stuff and leave right then and there, but we all agreed to just leave the next day. We went back inside and watched the windows the rest of the night. Eventually, all three of us fell asleep, but woke up again when the dog started growling. The three of us calmed down again and watched out of the window. We didn't see anything, but we never went to sleep again either. Morning finally arrived, and we were a little relieved, since we could see what was going on now. We were outside with another cigarette and heard some more noises. Aiden and my sister told us they couldn't sleep, so they were heading back home. After they left, Jonathan and I finally got some sleep. After dinner, Jonathan and Megan left too, and it was just me and my girlfriend again. He wanted us to leave too, and I told him we probably were going to, because I didn't want to stay another night there. I asked my girlfriend if it would be okay if we left, and she was glad, because she didn't sleep much either. We packed up everything to get ready to go, and I went to get the car, which I had parked off of the road so Aiden and Jonathan could park closer to the cabin. What I didn't expect was that my car couldn't get back on the road. We tried and tried to get it unstuck, but it was no use. It was getting dark, and I didn't want to walk to the nearest place to ask for help there, so we had no other option but to stay the night. That night was bad. I didn't get any real sleep. Around 1 a.m., my dog jumped up and started growling again, but this time it was at the living room door. I realized that the basement for the wood was under the living room, and that's where I could hear sounds coming from. My girlfriend heard the noises too and asked me to come back into the room with her because she was scared. I grabbed a kitchen knife and went back into the room. Eventually the sound stopped, but I didn't dare close my eyes for sleep. Another hour went by and the dog started growling again. He jumped up on the bed and started looking out of the window. I started looking out of the window too, hoping and praying that I wouldn't see the thing from last night. But sure enough, there it was, plain as day, and it was staring right at me. I only saw it for a few seconds before getting out of its view, but that was enough to still see it clearly when I closed my eyes even to this day. It was huge. Its shoulders were wide enough to cover the whole window, and this time I clearly saw that it was standing on two legs. It was hunched over so it could look through the window. Its fur was all black, with some gray mixed in on the tips, Its snout was longer in comparison than other dogs, and it looked like it couldn't hide its teeth fully in its mouth because they were so big. It had very pointy ears on its head, just like a Doberman, only they were taller. And it had short hair on its face. It looked like its face was very angry. It had longer hair on its head and on its neck, and it looked a little bit like a mane of a lion, but shorter than a lion. If I had to compare it to a movie werewolf, I would say either Bad Moon or Van Helsing. My girlfriend and I dropped out of sight, and she started to cry. I told her not to move in hopes that it would go away. I told her if it comes into the cabin, I was going to try to fight it off, while she ran as far and as fast as she could. We didn't dare look out of the window again, but the dog just kept growling. It walked around the cabin all night. I'm pretty sure it was watching us a few of those times, but I didn't look up to check on it. I'm basing this on the reaction of my dog. At times he would stand up and growl even more than he was, and watch out of the window. I've never been so happy to see the sun rise. Even after the sun was out though, we still waited a few hours before we got up from our hiding spot. My girlfriend, the dog, and I walked to the nearest place the next morning, which was a farm. I paid the farmer to get my car out, and we left in a hurry. I'll never go back there again. It still affects my life to this day. I have motion detectors and lights outside of my house, so nothing can surprise me at night. I don't walk through the woods or watch the stars anymore, and I do not go out without my weapon. I am positive I saw a Dogman, and I hope I never see one again. I think they're a species of animal, and I'm pretty sure they are very clever. I hope you can use this story as a way to warn others that there are real monsters out in the darkness. I just hope that this is the only true mysterious creature out there. If not, what more is roaming in the night? Best regards.
I grew up in the Sunshine State, living in the capital of Tallahassee. It was nice, and I enjoyed spending time in my childhood there. That is until it happened a few years back. It forced me to move as soon as possible. It all started back in January of 2017. I was 16 years old, and a few weeks after landing my first job at a local Chick-fil-A. I enjoyed working there, and I definitely recommend it if you're looking for a job. One night, I had to work from 4 to 11 p.m. I was getting trained to close the different stations and things like that. Usually, we close at 10, but we don't get out of there till 11, so we have to clean up and close up. Then we can go home for the night. The closing shift consists of cleaning the dishes, grills, fryers, floors, and everything else. As I was 16, due to child labor laws, I had to leave right at 11 p.m., as did most of my other coworkers. I finished up, clocked out, and walked to my car in the parking lot behind the restaurant, since we're not allowed to park in front of the customers. I got in my car and drove down the main road. My house was around 20 minutes away from the restaurant, but since it was 11 p.m., there weren't many cars out. I'd usually take about 15 minutes if I worked this late. I was on the main road for a few minutes, and then I turned onto a road that I normally use as a shortcut. This was a darker road, and it was curvy, and it didn't have many streetlights. To make things even creepier, this road had a large cemetery that really creeped me out. The few times I've driven on this road, I've heard what sounded like screams coming from the direction of the cemetery. I swear. Maybe I was just tired these times. Anyway, I was driving down the road with my brights on when a large dark figure ran out in front of me. Of course, I slammed on the brakes. Luckily, I didn't hit it. I came to a sudden and violent stop, and my heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I had trouble calming myself down. I looked around to see what it was that I nearly hit, and I did see it. The two of us locked eyes, staring unblinkingly at each other. This thing was huge. It was some kind of creature that I didn't have words for. 7 or 8 feet tall, at least, and it had a large masculine body. It was toned and thick. It had a canine-shaped head with pointy ears and a long snout. It looked at me, and it looked like it was grinning at me. Its teeth were razor sharp and as white as a cloud. Its eyes reflected a bright yellow glow, most likely from my headlights. I wanted to floor it, but I swear to you I couldn't even find the strength to move my toes. I was in some sort of state of shock, I guess. Not believing an inch of what my eyes were perceiving. It took me a bit too long to snap out of it. Finally, I punched the gas and got the hell out of there. I looked back in the rearview mirror and saw those eyes staring back at me as I sped down the road. I was so scared I was shaking. I got home, locked every single door and window, and sat down on my bed, just thinking about what the hell I just saw. I know this sounds crazy, but I really think that I just saw a werewolf. I don't know what else it could have been. Honestly, I had a lot of trouble sleeping that night, and when I would get the courage to close my eyes, I swear I could hear something just outside. My eyes would whip right back open. This happened all night long, and I didn't get a wink of rest. The fear from the thought of that thing following me home just shook me to my core. I didn't tell my friends or family about the encounter. It was just too far-fetched. I didn't think they'd believe me. But unfortunately, my story doesn't even end there. I had more encounters with this thing throughout the next 2 years. One night, I came home from work and had to park in the grass as my dad had to leave for work early in the morning. I didn't want to block him in. I got out of my car and got all my things, and then looked over to the left in the bushes, and there were some very familiar eyes, glowing at me again. This time, I was outside of my car. I felt so much more vulnerable there. Again, we locked eyes, and my heart sank all the way to my toes as it let out this deep growl. I had to bolt for the door. I didn't want to see what would happen next. Thank God my parents had left the door unlocked for me, as I was able to get in quickly. I locked the door and again made sure that all the other doors and windows were locked, and I could see that the figure was gone. I ended up being so scared that I changed my schedule at work the next day, telling them I didn't want to work late anymore. I was terrified that this thing could be stalking me, and obviously it knew where I lived. I didn't want to risk my life for a few nights a week just for minimum wage. I had some other small encounters every once in a while over the next year, with it looking in the window and whatnot, or I would see it staring at me outside. There was a time when I feared for my dog's life too. I had let him out a few times at night, but now I don't let him out after the sun goes down at all. I don't even care if he pees in the house anymore. I hope you can understand just how scared this thing makes me. I took active precautions in my life to avoid being in its way, to avoid even a chance of seeing it. But even as careful as I was terrified that it would break in the house one day. For all I knew, it may have already tried and I just didn't know it. I'm 18 now, and I live in North Carolina. I attend the University of Carolina at Chapel Hill. I haven't seen the creature in a while now, and my parents actually sold the house that we were living in. I'm a lot happier, and I feel safe again. I'm 10 hours away from that thing now, so hopefully putting some distance between me and it will help as well. I just hope I don't run into another one up here, because, there has to be more than one of them.
After finishing a week-long welding job, I needed to have a day to myself to go hunting with my dog Hunter Bone. He's a German Shepherd. And the bayou has always been a pleasure of mine. So, Saturday, at 4:45 a.m., on a foggy Louisiana morning, we got up and set out. 5:45 a.m., we were on an abandoned set of railroad tracks, going towards the old bayou bridge. At that point, Hunter Bone gazed between the rails and was gazing forward into the foggy dew. I looked down at him. "I don't see or hear any critters, my boy. What is it?" Then I heard the rocks between the rails crunch a bit. This was up in front of us. And then this huge, dog-like critter appeared. It was walking forward and was about 30 yards ahead. It had glowing yellow eyes and it stopped right in front of us. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. It had brownish gray fur, a huge wolf-like head, almost like Hunter's. But it was wide, and it had this big set of white fangs. The ears were pointed like a wolf or coyote, and it had these weirdly long legs. They looked canine-like and very strong. Its arms were long, hairy, and built. I didn't see anything that could have been a tail, though. This was like Arnold Schwarzenegger with monkey power himself. Hunterbone wanted to attack this thing. He was growling and trying to break away from me. I had to restrain him to keep him from charging at it. I was so terrified, I instantly lowered the 12-gauge Remington shotgun. I had it filled with 6 rounds of buckshot, and fearfully let go 2 rounds, right above this werewolf thing's head. This thing howled the most bone-tingling howl I've ever heard. It growled at us, and then ran back up the tracks over the bridge. I could hear the shrubbery snapping as he fled away into the foggy morning scene. Hunterbone and I ran lickety-split back to the pickup truck as fast as a deer could go. I turned right around and shot 2 more rounds in his direction, just for insurance. Then we hauled boogie quick back to the main road leading towards Crowley, Louisiana. As we pulled into the Exxon gas station, I told a state police officer what had just occurred. He said he too had this big dog-like creature cross in front of his cruiser one day in the early morning hours, and could not explain the encounter either. He suggested I keep this encounter to myself because people will think I'm daft and loony. Although this encounter only lasted 30 seconds or so, I will always have this experience forever embedded into my mind. I've been hunting in Louisiana for 35 years. The bayou is someplace I will always love, and I've never had a close-up encounter with anything this primordial, or scary, or awful, or fear-generating as this brief meeting with a dogman. I'd suggest you don't go alone into the swampy Louisiana bayou without being armed, and even so, watch yourself, as I never thought in this world a creature existed as this god-awful, spooky, diabolical thing does. Whiskey came to my mouth that day. That was the first time in 30 years. I was rattled and did not like this thing at all. Well, sir, there you have it. That's my encounter. I can still remember the face and eyes and those god-awful howls. See you later. The sports hunter from Crowley.
For some background info, I'm female, and I was raised in the deserts of southeast New Mexico on 2 different ranches, so I'm very well versed in the flora and fauna of the area. I know the critters around this state. We have always lived on very remote ranches, 50, sometimes even 75 miles from the nearest actual town. My senior year of high school, I moved out on my own to be part of a program to live close to my job and school. I was living about 12 miles from where my job and school were at. It seemed like living right in town was a good idea. My story starts in April of 1999. My boyfriend and I were rooming with a couple in a trailer just outside of Lakewood, New Mexico. We rented a room from them, and from time to time watched their 2 kids as part of the rental agreement. For a few weeks that April, a lot of neighboring landowners had been complaining about wild dogs on the river. They were attacking their dogs or scaring their livestock. We were about a mile from the Pecos River, and wild dogs had indeed been a problem in the area. One guy even reported some structural damage to one of his chicken coops. The couple we lived with had 2 dogs. They were medium-sized terrier mixes, and neither of them were on the cowardly side. But they'd been getting very skittish lately about going outside at night, so much so that we had to make sure to let them out right at sunset and again at sunrise, because they wouldn't leave the trailer house otherwise. They would never go outside at night. One night, on a Saturday, at about 11 p.m., The four of us were sitting around watching TV and basically just talking about stuff when the dogs were sleeping in the master bedroom. All of a sudden, they started growling and barking at the window on the south wall of the bedroom. This was really unusual behavior for them, so we all got up to see what was going on. By the time we got there, the dogs had shifted their barking away from the window and seemed to be barking at the wall and along the wall like they could smell something out there and was following it moving. It was moving at a very strange pace, and when they came up to the end of the room, they were barking and just going crazy, like this thing was wandering back and forth for a little bit. Suddenly, from further down the wall at the same time about where the kitchen was, we all heard this loud thump and scuff sound. It was powerful enough that we actually felt it, being that we were in an 80 by 16 trailer house. The dogs at this point just completely lost it, and they start letting out this high-pitched whine, and ended up hiding under the bed. We all ran out of the bedroom, down the hall into the kitchen to see what the heck was going on. But when we got to the kitchen, we realized it was pointless. It was late and dark, and there was cloud cover over the moon, so we couldn't see anything outside. Then we heard that scuffling noise again from further down the house, and went into the living room to see what was up. All of us were really confused at this point, but the next few moments seemed to happen in slow motion. We looked at the window, and there appeared this creature from the window, right at the left, and looking right in on us from the glass. It was something I can't even begin to imagine. I can only describe this thing as a man-dog. Its shoulder area was quite human, but was covered with short black fur. But it had the head of what looked like a Rottweiler to me. The teeth on this thing were massive. It had a big muzzle, and canine-like eyes. We all screamed at about the same time, and I guess that scream scared it off, because it ducked out of the window and disappeared. That's an image, though, that will forever be part of my brain. Sometimes I can't close my eyes without seeing it. Keep in mind that this trailer house was about 6 feet off of the ground, meaning this thing was 7 feet tall, at least. And no matter how big of a dog it was, this wasn't a regular dog. No dog could have stood up and looked into the window at us like that. The guys, being guys, immediately grabbed their shotguns and headed out the door, even though I told them that it was a bad idea. We were in a super dark desert area. It was at night, and there was a big unknown critter lurking about. They were out there for about 20 minutes before they came back inside. We were with the kids the whole time. The guys said they couldn't see anything. None of us really slept well that night, obviously. The next morning, there was this creepy feeling all through the trailer. I got up early, and I wanted to take a look around to see if there were any tracks outside that I could identify. Maybe I could figure out what this thing was. The grass and the weeds that were right beside the house pretty much hid any tracks that were there, and although I did find what looked like something had clawed at the side and the bottom of the house, I didn't find anything else. I did, however, follow the tracks that the guys made, and that was when I made a second, very unnerving discovery. The guys made clear tracks in the sand and the dirt, and whatever was out there was doing the same thing, because it looked like it was pretty much circling them the entire time they were out there looking around. It kept a distance of about 40 feet. The tracks looked huge and canine, and looked like they switched back and forth from 2 to 4 feet. It still gives me fear knowing that it was so close to them, and probably just waiting for the right moment to pounce on them from the darkness, and they never would have known. Back in 2008, I was on a hunting trip with my brother up near the Canadian-Michigan border. We had rented a cabin for the week and were looking forward to a nice, quiet weekend until this monster spoiled it all. One night, after a day of being out in the woods, we were tired and didn't feel like cooking us a meal, so I decided to jump in my truck, drive into town, and get some pop and some grub while my brother stayed back to wash up. So I drove into town by myself, and I was away about 45 minutes, probably not even a solid hour. I talked with a gal at the counter for a few, but I wanted to get back to feed my brother, since he gets grouchy when he doesn't have his food, and I didn't want him hacking on me all night. By the time I headed back, it was getting dark, and by the time I reached the cabin, the sun had already gone down all the way. I hit the road leading to the cabin, and could see the silhouette of something big looking in one of the windows of the cabin. At first, I thought it was Everett, since it looked like it was standing on 2 legs. But this thing looked too tall to be Everett. So then I thought to myself, well, then it's a bear. Now I didn't want no bear coming around the cabin and causing trouble, so I decided to scare him off with my headlights. So I aim my truck in his direction and flip on my high beams. What I saw then wasn't a bear. It was an honest-to-God monster. When my lights hit it, it spun around, and I saw the whole thing. It was only standing on 2 legs. Now, you wanted a description of this thing, and I wish I had my camera handy so I could have just took a picture and gave it to you. But I wasn't expecting to see any type of monster out there. He was a big guy, like Harry from Harry and the Hendersons, but it wasn't any Sasquatch I was looking at. It looked more like a werewolf. He was more than 7 feet tall, based on how high his head was above the top of the window. He was brown, like a chocolate lab, but the coat was different. It was shaggy like a wolf, and had lighter spots in the chest and legs. He had big, big muscles, like he went to the gym. His chest was really wide, and his shoulders looked like that Brock Lesnar guy. A real musclehead. He had arms that looked like they could kill you easily, and these long, fingered hands with big nails at the ends. And his neck was as thick as my waist almost. Even with all that power in his body, that ain't what scared the hell out of me. It was his face. He looked like he was madder than hell about something. Maybe because I interrupted him. Maybe that was just his attitude all day. Who knows? But those eyes will haunt me all of my days. I'm a firm believer in good and evil, and this thing, it was pure evil. The light reflected off his eyes like a night predator, and the rest of his face looked just like a wolf. The snout, the teeth, the ears, the nose, all of it just looked like a wolf. When this thing spun around to face me, it pivoted on its 2 back legs and turned just like a human would. First, he turned his waist to look at me, then pivoted to face me entirely. My body went numb, and I started to shake. What the hell was this thing? A werewolf? They weren't supposed to exist, but there I was, looking at something that looked mighty like a werewolf. The only thing I could think was that it was trying to get to my brother, and he didn't have any idea that that thing was out there. So I started honking my horn and flashing my lights at it to try and drive it off. Then, that thing put its hands up to cover its eyes just like a person would. It gnashed its teeth at me and then ran off into the woods. And it was still on 2 legs while it was running. It didn't look like it had any problem running on them 2 legs. I pulled right the hell up to the cabin as close as I could, grabbed my mag light, and took off into the door. I left the truck running, and I was calling out to my brother like a crazed man. Everett ran into the living room yelling at me, asking what the hell I was doing, and I told him something was out there and we had to leave. Luckily, my brother is a trusting man. 43 years of living with me, he should know when I'm serious, right? So we grabbed our rifles and mag lights and took off to the truck with haste. As we ran to the truck, we could both hear something big running in the woods right next to the cabin, and then the loudest growl I've ever heard. That growl almost shook my insides. We tossed the guns into the truck and jumped in. Everett was shining his light into the forest, but he didn't see nothing. Then we took the hell off out of there. On the way back into town, I told my brother what I'd seen, and he shook his head. I think he was letting it soak in. He looked at me and said, "Arn, I think you just saw yourself a werewolf." I looked up at the sky. It wasn't a full moon. I didn't know what the hell I saw that night. We went back during the day a few days later, after going to church, I might add, and praying a lot. We got our stuff, and then talked to the gentleman that rented us the cabin and told him what I'd seen. He swore to us
he never heard anything like that around there before. But I got the impression he was lying to us. And that, my friend, is why I never go into the woods alone or unarmed anymore.
I was 7 years old when I encountered a dogman, and I still have nightmares about it. It was in the north woods of Wisconsin in 2007. My folks and I were staying at a cabin with our family friends for the week when it happened. We'd already been there for 3 days, and my friend and I had already found these huge wolf tracks. We showed my dad, but all he said was stay close to the cabin, because there might be a wolf in the area. Being kids, we didn't think anything else about it. We just followed my dad's rule and played around the house. I was always on the lookout for wolves though after that, or bears, or anything else that could come get us. But we never saw anything. A few nights after the pot incident, after my friend and I were tucked into bed, is when things got scary. The two of us were sharing a room for the week, so we both saw it. I don't know how late it was, but I do know this. I woke up to my friend screaming his lungs out. He was calling for help. When I woke up, I was already scared because of the way he was yelling, and I asked him what was wrong. He pointed to the window, and that's when I saw a dogman. It was hunched over, looking right into the window. It was really big enough to grab both of us and run off, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. It had bright yellow eyes and a black nose at the end of a long muzzle, like a German Shepherd dog, and it had big pointed ears. It looked like it was drooling. Its head was facing downwards, but its eyes were looking straight into the room. Then it put a claw up to the screen of the window, and we saw the large fingernails on its fingers. Its hand really reminded me of a raccoon's hand. It looked like it could be used to grab stuff. At this point, I started screaming too, and we both ran for the door of the bedroom. By the time we flung the door open, both of our dads were at the door and yelling at us to tell them what was wrong. Our moms were following right behind them. We both started talking hysterically and pointing towards the bedroom, trying to explain what we saw. Of course, they didn't exactly believe us, but they did believe that something was out there. But they were convinced it was just a regular wolf. Either way, they went out there with some guns, even though we begged them through tears not to go. Because I was certain if they went out there, that thing would kill them both, and then it would come into the house and get the rest of us. They were gone for what felt like forever, looking around the cabin. When they finally came back in, they said they didn't find anything. But even I could tell they were scared. The next day, both of our families packed up our stuff and left, even though we should have been there another 3 days. To top it off, they wouldn't tell us why we were leaving, and they didn't tell us until we were older. One day, all 4 of the parents sat us down. We were 12 years old, and they told us we were ready to know the truth about that camping trip. My friend's dad explained to us that when they went outside to investigate, they saw big wolf prints, just like the ones we saw a few days before that. Except these prints were right at our window, where we told them the thing was looking in at us, and they found scratch marks on the side of the house. They started circling the cabin again, but then they heard something running from them, so they chased after it. But then they stopped dead cold in their tracks when they heard the growls that this thing was making. It sounded huge. They decided right then and there they weren't looking for it anymore, and that what we were saying was true. My dad told us we ended up staying up the entire night, waiting for it to come back. We were ready to fight to the death to save you two and your mothers. And we were willing to die to make sure that you guys made it out. Then he told me they did manage to catch a glimpse of it early in the morning, and confirmed we had seen what we said that we did, and that it was walking on 2 legs. Monsters are not real. Things don't go bump in the night. Everything can be explained logically and rationally. Well, it's harder to convince yourself of that once you've seen something that can't actually be explained. The following encounter happened to me on October 3rd, 2012, around midnight in Moore County, North Carolina. And it's eerily similar to the encounter that Anthony Cheney had you present a while back. I was driving home from my girlfriend's house around midnight. No one else was around on the road while I was driving. I saw this thing on the road up in front of me, and I thought at first that it was a man, because it looked like it was walking along the side of the road, on two legs. As I got closer, I started making out more details, and I realized that I was looking at something that was not a man at all. Then I thought to myself it might be a bear, walking on two legs. I slowed down a little and came up on it, thinking that if it was a bear, that would be a cool sight, because I'd never seen a bear before. Then this thing turned around to look at me, and my heart basically burst right out of my chest. It was a freaking werewolf. Although I have no idea why I did it, I slammed on my brakes and stared at this thing, as it stood right there in the beam of my headlights. I was frozen in terror. This thing was huge. It had to be 7 feet tall, hell, maybe even taller. It had light brown fur, mixed with some dark streaks. It had a huge head, like a wolf's, but a lot larger, complete with the long snout, big long teeth, and big pointed ears. It had a wide chest and long arms that had huge hands at the ends of them. Yes, I said hands, not paws. It did have long-ass clawed fingers at the ends of those hands, though. To top it off, the legs bent backwards, just like a dog. This thing stared at me for a moment, almost like it was trying to figure me out, just like I was trying to figure it out. I was almost hyperventilating at this point. I wasn't able to form a thought to even figure out what to do. This thing just stood there like it didn't even care if I was staring at it. I know this sounds like it went on forever, but honestly, the entire encounter only lasted about 30 seconds. It took a deep breath and growled at me, showing its teeth, turned around and ran into the field. I lost sight of it in the darkness. I popped my car into reverse, spun it around, and hauled it out of there, back to my girlfriend's house. I called her on my way back, and told her what I saw. She started laughing, and told me that she knew that I was joking with her. But when I got back to her house, she saw the look on my face, and how scared I was, and she knew that I wasn't pulling her leg. I am 100% certain that what I saw that night was a Dogman. I'm writing to you hoping that you can share your thoughts on what happened to me when I was young. I want to know what you and the people that listen to you think about the story that I'm going to tell you. It was the early 90s. I was 16 and still living on my parents' property. We lived in Northern California and had a few acres worth of property, including a barn that we used for storage, not for any animals. Our property was backed up against the woods, so we were used to all kinds of critters coming and going, including bears, deers, and on a couple occasions, coyotes. None of these animals are responsible for what happened during that summer. Leading up to those nights when the thing would visit us, there'd be times when you're outside and the wildlife is buzzing. Then everything goes silent at the drop of a hat, like someone hit the mute button on a TV. That would send a chill up your spine, like you were being watched by something just out of sight. When that happened, I would run back inside, lock the door, and try to do anything to keep my mind off of it. That's probably the only reason my room was ever clean, because I needed something to keep me busy. Then one night, Rusty, our old collie, started acting weird, like he had sensed something that we couldn't. At first, he perked his ears up, and then raised his head, like a dog does when they hear something. Then he started doing this low growl. That night, my mom was working late, so it was just me, my sister, and my dad. The three of us just watched him, acting the way he was. Then my dad asked him, "What's wrong, old man?" Rusty snapped out of it and went over to my dad to lick his hand. He wagged his tail and whined at my dad. He seemed to be back to normal. Well, that only lasted for about 10 minutes or so. Then he went back to doing the same thing. Dad was convinced there was a raccoon or something outside, but us girls knew Rusty better than anyone. We'd grown up together. He didn't act like that over any raccoon, or possum, or deer. He was in defense mode. There was something outside that he wanted to protect us against. I asked Dad what else it could be, and he said there was a chance that it could be a bear, or a coyote, maybe even a wolf. So, we should all just stay inside. My sister asked what we were going to do about my mom. Dad said when it got close to the time she'd be home, he'd watch out the window for her. I went up to my room, not too worried, and started reading one of my books. My window was open, and instead of reading, I stared out of it, seeing if I could see anything out there. We didn't have any lights on the back property, just the light from our back porch, so I couldn't see anything. Then I started hearing this weird sound, like heavy breathing or grunting. It was outside in the yard somewhere, but I couldn't make it out. Whatever it was, it sounded big. Scarier still, everything around me was quiet again. Not even the crickets were making any noise. I went downstairs again to tell my dad, and he basically confirmed to me that it should be a bear outside then, because of all the things that I was hearing. Little did we know, it wasn't a bear at all. When my mom finally got home, she came speeding down the driveway, which was pretty long. When I saw how fast she was driving, I was worried. Something had to be wrong. My dad went out to greet her. We were still worried about the bear at that point, and he didn't want her to get attacked by it. But my mom came to a stop and jumped out of the car, telling my dad nervously that she'd seen something run across the road behind her truck. And whatever it was on 2 legs. Dad asked Mom if she thought it was a person. She shook her head and said it looked too big to be a person. But she couldn't give any more details because it all happened so fast. It only took 2 steps, and it was across the road. My dad was stumped. It couldn't have been a bear. They don't run on 2 legs. And even if they did, they wouldn't be as agile as this thing was. He decided we should all get some rest, and we turned in for the night, even though I heard him walking around downstairs after we went to bed. I don't know if he saw anything or not. I guess I was too scared to ask him, but I think he was up all night making sure that we were okay. A few weeks later, whatever it was came back, and this time it was in the barn. By this time, the fear of the night, when it first came, had dwindled down, and my sister and I were comfortable going back outside after the sun went down. Most nights, we would go out with Rusty and watch the stars. That night started off just like any of those other nights. Then everything changed. Again, everything got quiet. Except Rusty. He was making that low growl again. And he was looking straight at the barn. My sister and I looked at each other. I could tell that she was scared. So was I. Then we heard the noises coming from the barn. Something was moving around inside of it, knocking things over and making the same grunting breathing that I had heard the first night. "We have to go back to the house and tell Dad," I barely whispered to Cassie. She nodded, and we slowly backed away towards the house. When we got there, we tore into the house in a panic and tried to tell Dad what was going on. He slowed us down, and we told him what we heard. He looked out of the window towards the barn and grabbed his rifle. I guess at this point, he didn't care what it was. It was a danger to his daughters, and he wanted to defend us. The next part of the story is just what Dad told me, since Cassie, my mom, and myself stayed inside the house. Dad said he went to the barn and heard the sounds, and then this gigantic crash, like something knocked over something heavy. So my dad called out to the barn, saying that if there was a person in there, they need to leave now to avoid being shot. He said the sound stopped for a few seconds, like whatever it was now knew that someone was outside, and it was trying to think about what to do next. Then whatever it was roared. That part I heard from the house. He didn't need to tell me anything about it. What kind of animal can roar like that? Or that loud? It sounded like a deep scream, to be honest. It didn't sound like a bear. It didn't sound like a wolf. It sounded mad. Like something pissed off at my dad because he had interrupted it. After that, there was another crash from the other side of the barn, which Dad said nearly scared him to death. Then he heard whatever it was running. It was heavy, because he heard the footsteps when they landed on the ground. He saw something running off into the side of the barn, and towards the woods, so he took a shot at it. He doesn't think he hit anything, but the sound of the gunshot caused the thing to roar again. When he shined the flashlight in the direction that the thing was running, he was able to catch a glimpse of brownish-gray fur. But this thing was so fast, he couldn't keep his light focused enough to get more detail. He said whatever it was, though, was taller than him. It had big shoulders. He couldn't describe the head, just that it was large. It was tall, and its legs were so long that it cleared the distance it was running in just a few steps. It made it to the trees and disappeared. Whatever it was, I think Dad scared it off that night, because we never saw it again. Although, for the 2 nights after that, and then once again a few months later, we did hear those screams again. The day after Dad chased it off, he went into the barn with his friend Rob, and they found out what the sounds were that were making the crashing noises. One of them was a dresser that we had put in there because my parents didn't have a use for it. It was this huge, heavy oak dresser that took my dad and Rob to move it in there in the first place. It looked like the creature grabbed it and tossed it across the barn. What could be strong enough to do that? The other crash he had heard was the sound of one of the doors on the side of the barn. He found that door smashed in and laying outside of the barn about 10 feet away from it. It looked like it was smashed right through while this thing was trying to get out of the barn. I moved away for college a couple years after that, and my parents moved away when they were too old to be that far out of town. Every so often, I still drive out there with my husband and our children. I've told them about the summer that the creature paid us a visit. It makes a good campfire story.
My name is Brandon, and this story takes place in 2008 or 2009. I'm not sure which year, because I was really young. At the time, I was living with my grandma and grandpa. We had a few people helping my grandparents out in the grass in our yard. We were putting in the grass so we'd have somewhere to play on. So me and my brother would just play around the house at the time. It wasn't a very big house, but it was big enough for us. It had a deck on the back and a small patch of woods behind it. One day, we were just playing like normal, and I felt that something was off about the woods. Even as young as I was, there was just something different. It felt like something was watching us. I could hear the sounds of leaves and branches moving. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe it was something else. A little while later, though, we were both hungry and went inside to get something to eat. When we went back outside to play again, I'd forgotten all about the creepiness that I'd felt earlier. And that was it for the day. But the next day, there was only a little grass left to cover the house, and the sun was setting. I was playing and walked behind the house again. That's where I'd felt scared the day before. I turned to my right and saw this big animal, or something that looked just like a werewolf. It had yellow eyes, and it was lying on the ground, maybe 7 feet away from us, and underneath the porch. It looked dirty, like it'd been outside for a long time. I saw part of its tail, and the creature looked black to me. I can't say exactly how big, because most of it was hiding. The way it was positioned, it looked almost like it were trying to be away from people, because it didn't want to be seen. It had a long muzzle and pointed ears, though. That I definitely saw. And this thing was watching me. I stood there for a few seconds, then ran to the front of the house, telling my grandpa what I'd seen. Of course, he didn't believe me, and told me to just keep playing for the rest of the time. But I just sat at the front of the house, thinking about what I'd seen. I still don't know what it was. Before I moved from there, I swear, I heard things outside the woods, and sometimes I saw things. One time it was getting kinda late, and I saw some kind of shadowy figure out in the woods. But I thought it was just the dark, or my mind messing with me. But this thing looked like something was standing on two legs. It would crouch, and then it would move around. What do you think? Could this have been a Dogman encounter? Thank you. Brandon.